All right. Welcome to Using Data Cleanup and Spreadsheets Tips and Tricks. If you thought you were going to another workshop, you're in the wrong Zoom meeting. Um, I'm Miloche Kottman, the head of cataloging and archival processing at the University of Kansas Libraries, and I'm joined today by Rachel Searcy, the accessioning archivist at New York University. And then we have two shadow trainers, learning the ropes, Kevin Clare and Regina Cara. Um, let's move on to slide number 2. In advance of this training, you received an email with an agenda for the training with links to all the materials you will need to participate in this workshop and continue learning after the training is over. If you did not receive the link, you may want to check your spam folder. If someone else registered on your behalf, they may have received the link instead. Either way, the link to the Google Drive is available in the chat. I dropped it in there a few seconds ago. We may not stick exactly to the agenda, but we will take the planned break included in the agenda at the appropriate time. Included in the course materials is a quick start guide you can use to supplement today's training. Test what you have learned today by using the guide and by creating examples within your own ArchivesSpace instance or in the ArchivesSpace sandbox available via our website. You can access the ArchivesSpace sandbox from the ArchivesSpace Getting Started website, which is linked in your guide with other useful resources. There is also a link to a post-workshop evaluation in the agenda we hope you complete at the end of this training. We are using Zoom webinar for this training, and your microphone and camera are both muted. If you'd like to ask a question of the trainer, we ask that you use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you have a general question or need some other form of assistance, please feel free to reach out in the chat. Some questions will be read and answered during the allocated time for Q&A. We are using the latest version of ArchivesSpace for this training, which is version 4.2. If you are currently using an earlier version of ArchivesSpace, keep in mind some of the features you see today may not be available to you at home. We also won't be able to troubleshoot issues with your own implementations of ArchivesSpace at your organization. If you have a question or issue with your implementation, please email us at archivespacehome@lyrasis.org. Also keep in mind this workshop assumes familiarity with ArchivesSpace terminology and archival concepts. If you don't have this necessary background, I recommend reviewing the recordings of a recent ArchivesSpace Basics training linked on the ArchivesSpace Getting Started webpage. Finally, please keep in mind there are many participants in this workshop coming from a variety of institutions and experience levels. Remember that the ArchivesSpace Code of Conduct applies to all ArchivesSpace events, including virtual events. Please remember to be considerate and respectful in your interactions in the Q&A and in chat. And with that, let's get started. Let's end that for now. And go to ArchivesSpace. Yay! ArchivesSpace allows import of data from standardized records as well as comma-separated files. Let's get rid of that. I'm already here. By importing legacy data, you can centralize the management of information about your collections within one application. Page 4 of your Quick Start Guide has a chart that lists the various types of records that can be imported into ArchivesSpace. You can use background jobs to import agents via EAC, CPF, XML records, resource records in EAD format, or you could do resource, session, and agent records using Mark XML. In this session, we will be talking about the files of the type found in the last 2 rows in this chart. Comma-separated files, which are referred to as CSV files, and Excel or CSV spreadsheet templates. Let's see. I have that open. You can find crosswalks and templates for these background jobs at the ArchivesSpace website. Then you would click on Resources for all users, and then you would click on Migration Tools and Data Mapping. So Data Import and Export Maps section. Anything that has the word map on it is a crosswalk of the fields from the source data and how it'll look in ArchivesSpace. Anything that says template, on the other hand, is a bulk import template, do not use those. I'll show you where you could get the good templates further along in this thing. Let's go ahead and download the one that says a session map. And if you open folder for that, and oh, come on. Too many windows, not enough time. Okay, so here it is in my download folder because that's where everything goes, whether you want it to or not. You click on enable editing. So here is the import map for sessions. As you can see, it tells you the column header that you'll see in the template. Helpful things like the data type, whether it's text or a date, and in some cases, whether there's predefined values or formats that you must follow. So that can be very helpful. So I recommend downloading those. And yeah, like I said, don't use these templates. They're just wrong. So let's move on to actually selecting the appropriate spreadsheet template. In ArchivesSpace, if you click on this gear menu over here, one of your choices is bulk import templates. And it takes you to a page with the bulk import templates. The beauty of this is the templates that will download are going to be compatible with whatever version of ArchivesSpace you have. Sometimes they have to do a little tweak, etc. And who really remembers what version they're on anyway? So this way, you're always going to get the right one. So these are the templates for uploading spreadsheet data into ArchivesSpace using the different import options in the background job areas. The data required for a successful import depends on the type of record being created. You do not have to fill out every row and column. However, do not delete column. Very important. Do not delete, do not rearrange. Instead, hide the column if it's in your way. Some templates include a row of sample data. Unless you want to create a record with that sample data, please delete the sample row before uploading your spreadsheet. And very important here, like I said, do not delete the header row. You can add additional columns for some spreadsheets and data points. You could find that information in the manual, which I'll give you links to. And definitely do not rearrange in existing columns. You'll see that some of the templates like bulk import AO have both an Excel and a CSV version. So here's a CSV and here is the XSL, while others just have the CSV version. CSV stands for comma separated values. These values are plain text with data separated by commas, hence the comma separated values. The data is stored as raw data, which means there is no formatting, formulas, or other advanced features. You could open CSV files in text editors like Notepad or spreadsheet software like Excel or Google Sheets. Please note, depending on your settings, if you open a CSV file in Excel, the program might helpfully reformat some of your data. For example, dates. It can be helpful to set the columns to either general or text to avoid it trying to convert dates to numbers for you. XLSX files are for use with Microsoft Excel or compatible programs and contain formatting, drop-downs, and other Excel functionality like using the fill handle to autofill a series of numbers. Let's go ahead and look at the Accession CSV. So to download it, I would just click on the download button. And then I could open it. And here it is. If I want to compare it to the, whatever it is, the map that I already downloaded, I can put them side by side so that it's really small on your screen. No, but so here's the map and here is the CSV. So you'll see here in this first row is your headers. Like this one says title, this one says number, etc. If I want to know how to fill out the title field, I would come here. Remember in the maps, they're in alphabetical order. So over here, it's row 47 to fill out the title. you would use just plain text, and there's no special notes. So I could go ahead and fill out the text, ta-da, which is what the sample record just has plain text. Over here, for the date, you could see that Excel very helpfully put it in month, day, year format. And I don't want that format. So what I can do, and that's the reason I don't want that format, is if you look up here in row 7, the accession date, it is a date field, which is good, but then it says it has to be in the following formats with the year in front, the month, and the day. So what I could do is take this column, right click and do format cells, and I could change it to text. And you'll see that it then changes the text here to the number version of whatever that date was. So, but I can type it in 2021-12-05, and now it stays. So there's one helpful hint right there. As I mentioned earlier, there may be columns in your spreadsheets that you don't need. Don't delete the column, instead hide it. So like I don't have 4 session numbers, so I'll never use this field. So again, you would just highlight the whole column, right click or alternate click, and click on hide. So now that column is hidden out of my view. I won't accidentally type in it. It'll be great. Let's go back to ArchivesSpace. And you need to carefully read what each one of these templates are doing. So for example, the assessment CSV creates and links assessments to existing accession records. So the assessment one does. So you can't just create an accession and then add it, sort of thing. The AO in bulk import archival objects stands for archival objects, obviously. It has 2 templates. Let's go ahead and look at both to compare after I get rid of these so that they're out of my way. No, I don't want to save. And I don't want to save this one either, just in case it asks. Okay, so we have the bulk import CSV. Let's download that. And the bulk import Excel. Let's download that. And we'll go to the folder and let's look at the CSV. The CSV, like I said, is plain. It's plain, it's ugly, it's boring. But it does have 2 header rows. Don't edit them. And don't edit that one either. Let's close that and look at the one that's for Excel. This one is much, much prettier and has lots of colors. It has some instruction information about what's required and what's not required. So if you have a choice, this is the one I would use as my helpful tip there. And let's go back to ArchivesSpace. This template for the archival object one should be used when you want to add archival objects to an existing resource record in ArchivesSpace. You will be able to create series and subseries records, add linked records like agents and subjects, dates, extents, notes, containers, and digital objects. For the digital objects, this template is creating them from scratch and linking them to the archival objects it is creating at the same time. So this is not for existing digital objects that you want to link to archival objects. The DO in bulk import stands for digital object. The bulk import digital object templates are to be used when you want to create brand new digital objects and link them to existing archival objects in a resource. The digital object CSV creates a brand new digital object records. These records will not be linked to the archival objects, but you can include fields like agents, subjects, and events in the digital object record. The location CSV creates new location records. Please note that this template is for creating the location records themselves, not linking materials to locations. And then the subject CSV creates new subject records. Please note that this template is for creating the subject records themselves, not linking them to other records. All right. Are there any pressing questions at the moment? All right, then we will move on to spreadsheet tips and tricks. I will be sharing this session with Rachel. She gets all the good ones, but we will soldier on anyway. Let me get rid of that. It's bothering me. Archivable objects. The archivable object instructions sheet can be found at, let me give you the link. I'm pretty sure I have it. I think so. Maybe. Nope. I have it. But I have to get this thing out of the way. Oh, well, I'll give it to you at the end of the session because all my windows are just in a mess. But in the ArchivesSpace manual, if you could get there, because only ArchivesSpace members can use the manual, there is importing archival objects from Excel or CSV. This is very helpful for filling out all the individual fields. It has the columns and the mapping for what's required, what's suggested, that sort of thing. So that's my first helpful hint. You could also, let me move this out of my way and get the Google Drive thing. So this one, these are the instructions. And let's go here. Ta-da. So yes, that is the thing. So I could put that in there. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Rachel. But there's also the Harvard. For those people who are not members of ArchivesSpace, you can get there via a GitHub by Harvard, which is the importing archival objects thing. It's very out of date, but most of the information is still good. So that could prove helpful. Let's see. Now, so there's documentation that'll help. That's the tip and trip. The other thing is let's go back to ArchivesSpace and open up a record and get rid of this stupid chat. Webinar, browse, resources. We'll go to the Mujeres one. And in the spreadsheets for archival objects, the EAD ID or the resource ID is required. We're going to create a bulk import, archival object bulk import template to add a series to this oral history project for the physical items, because let's say they recorded all the interviews on cassette tapes and we want to actually have access to the cassette tapes. So we'll make a series for the cassette tapes. Not very fancy, but it's something. So this is the record we'll do. And then let's do a partially filled out bulk import. Da-da-dum. Here it is. So I've obviously filled it out somewhat so that you guys don't have to watch me fumble around typing everything. But so you have to have the EAD ID or you have to have the resource URI. In my spreadsheet, I went with the EAD ID. That information can be found in your finding a data down here where it says EAD ID. That's pretty helpful. But apparently there are people out there who do not use EAD IDs. So instead they have to use the resource ID. And you go, where do I get that information? Well, the easy way to find it is to have it in your browse or search results. So to do that, you click on where your name is, um, and you click on the default repository preferences. And then down here where it says resource browse column, you click on that. And then this is the first value that has no value. So I'm going to click on that down arrow and I'm going to click on URI. But I also want it to show when I search things. So I'm going to click on search columns. I'm going to click on URI here, and then I'm going to save my preferences. So now I'm going to go back and redo that browse for resources and come down here. And this is the URI for the resource that I would, if I wanted to, put into here, the resource URI. But you don't need both, so I'm going to just stop with the EAD ID. Let's say I didn't have, so I have the EID ID and I copied it over, which is again another good idea to copy over because you think you could type, but you know what? There are days that you just have fat thumbs and they won't work. And you won't realize that you have a typo in it. So I always recommend copying the EAD ID over or the resource URI. So then what you could do is, because this is an Excel spreadsheet, you could copy this and then you can pull it all the way down and you could just do Control V and paste. So yay. Hidden columns. Let's talk about hidden columns. You notice it goes from I to K and skips to J, and then boy, it goes from K to W without anything else showing. So I've hidden some columns because I'm never going to fill them out. Again, you don't delete them, you don't rearrange them. But if I wanted to see them again, I would click on the K. I would then highlight the W, and then you would right click and you would click on unhide, and boom, all those useless columns are back. So that's how you do the column. Now for the hard part. Let's talk about hierarchical relationships. You'll notice let's get rid of that thing. Here, I have these numbers 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3. These are your hierarchical relationships. You can import archival objects using the spreadsheet at any level. That is from the resource record or from the archival object records. The importer relies on numerical sequencing to understand the parent-child relationships. If you selected, let's go here. If you've selected the resource record for your starting point, 1 indicates that this title will be an immediate child to the resource record. If you started an archival object record, use 1 if you're adding a sibling to a selected archival object record, a 2 if you're doing a child, and etc. You can therefore describe several levels of the archival object in a single spreadsheet. All right, so let's go back to my spreadsheet and see if we can figure out what I'm doing. So I want to do a series, and so that's a 1. So if I load this from the resource record, there will be a child to the resource record called cassette tapes. And then I want to have a sub-series under cassette tapes that says sub-series. So that's a 2. And then the actual items are going to be a 3. And then I'm going back to a sub-series for the Cedar Rapids. So that's a 2. So if I loaded at the resource record, that's how it'll work out. But I could also remove the cassette tapes line, create the cassette tape series manually in ArchivesSpace, and then load this spreadsheet again and get the same results. Now, if you find the use of multiple hierarchies in a single spreadsheet confusing, do what most people do. Just create a separate spreadsheet for each series or subseries and load the archival objects that way. Dates, good old dates. As we saw earlier, Excel likes to reformat your dates. And here we go. The Excel spreadsheet that we have has already been pre-formatted so that it's a text field. Yay! So yet another reason why it's a good idea to use the Excel spreadsheet. Um, Now let's talk about controlled vocabulary. Unfortunately, it's very easy to create variant values in your controlled value list when importing via spreadsheet. Let's look at the values for the container instance type in ArchivesSpace. To do that, it's under System, Manage Controlled Value Lists. Keep in mind, you have to have permissions to be able to see and edit this. So if you don't have permissions from your system administrator, you might not be able to see what I'm about to show you, the controlled value list. Let's go to instance types. They're in the eyes. Shocker. Instance type. Okay. The instance types that come with ArchivesSpace by default have a value that starts with a lowercase letter, and the translation has an uppercase letter to start with. In addition, multi-word types use an underscore, like computers underscore disks, rather than a space. In the spreadsheets, you need to exactly match either the value or the translation, including the underscore or the capitalization, whichever one you use. Doesn't matter, just got to exactly match it. In this database, if I scroll down further, you'll see that there are two mixed materials. The one that was applied by default, and then the one that is, both of them are lowercase. This is likely because somebody used a spreadsheet or the EAD importer or Mark XML and didn't include the underscore for mixed materials. And so it just created its own controlled value with that value. What I've done to demonstrate it is I've added KitKat here instead of audio so that it'll create an instance type of KitKat, just so that you can see it if you want to. It is recommended that you regularly review the controlled value lists, removing from them variant values that might be added during the import process. For more information about cleaning up your controlled value list, you could see the instructions in the ArchivesSpace manual, or Rachel explains it in a YouTube video that you could also access. And I'll give you links to that at the end of this section when I'm done jabbering. I can't do 4 things at once. I know, it's shocking. For some data points, you could add more columns if needed. For example, the container instance. Let's go over here. Container stuff is in yellow on my spreadsheet. Let's go a little smaller. Okay, so this is container number 1, and it goes all the way to grandchild, just like it does in ArchivesSpace. And this is container number 2. You could tell because it says top container 2. But let's say I have 3 containers and I want all 3. You could do that for this row. The instructions will tell you what other data points you're able to add additional rows for. So check that out if you want to do that. But let's do an additional container so that we have 3. What you're going to do is highlight all of these. You're going to insert rows to the left by clicking on Insert. Ta-da! And now we're going to copy those rows. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we do Control C for copy. Then we come back over here and we're going to paste. So now you have duplicates. Both say they're copy to container number 2. But we want this to be container number 3. So very important in row 4 to change every time you see the number 2. Well, not every time, but most of the time you see the number 2, you're going to change that to a 3. So we would change it to a 3 here, a 3 here, a 3, and This will be a 3. And this is why I said not every time, because then it goes 2, 2, 2 threes, etc. So this would be a 3. So it's like it's the second 2 once you get past the first 2s. So you could also change them in row 5. If you don't do it in row 4, then your import's going to be wonky and or fail. You don't have to do it to row 5, but I recommend doing it because otherwise you're just going to get confused. So then you would just do that all the way across. And now you can have even more containers if you want. Yay! Copying, pasting. Everybody loves to copy and paste, but if you copy and paste into these spreadsheets, you can introduce non-Unicode characters like our infamous Microsoft curly quotes and M dashes. These sneak in sometimes and can cause the imports to fail. It's always a good idea to only validate your spreadsheet prior to importing to identify Unicode errors, among other things. I think Rachel will show you what that means at a later point. So if you are told that, hey, you got invalid Unicode characters and you look all over and you can't find them, there are some things you can do. Um, Excel allows non-printable ASCII Unicode characters to hide in cells. These always break the background jobs. To remove line breaks, press Control H or click on Find and Replace. In the Find What box, hold down your Alt key and type 0010 on your number pad, or press Control J. Leave Replace with a completely blank field and then click Replace All. There's also a way you can clean formulas. So you could copy and paste it into yet another spreadsheet so that you could then run the clean formula. And that will instantly strip out all non-printable Unicode characters. And there's also, you would use find and replace to replace your curlies with straight up and downs and your M dashes and N dashes to standard. And then you could also, sometimes your file gets corrupted, Excel file gets corrupted, and sometimes you're able to upload those to Google Sheets and then download them again, and then they're fine. I have no idea why. And I don't know why it works sometimes and not other times, but you could also try that. Now I'll turn it over to Rachel after I figure out how to stop sharing. There we go.
Thank you, Malaka. Let me get my screen set up. Okay. I might not need to refer to the screen much, but I'll just get ready. And I'm going to hide the chat. So if you all need to interrupt me at any point, please just verbally do that. So I'm going to continue on our sort of tips and tricks grab bag section by talking about some things that you can do before you import and when you're importing. So this sounds so obvious, but it is worth mentioning that we really recommend that you review or re-review your spreadsheet before you run the import. It can be really easy to overlook things. You've potentially been focusing a lot on one particular part of your spreadsheet at the exclusion of others, and it's really easy to go on autopilot. So, before you import, maybe take a second, run to the bathroom, and come back to it with fresh eyes and just re-review it. If you have hidden columns, which Malaka had demonstrated earlier, you might want to unhide them and then review your spreadsheet before trying to run your job. This is actually something that I have run into myself, as I am a big column hider. And sometimes if I, need more rows kind of late in the game, I might have hidden the hierarchy or level of description field, and because they're hidden, I've forgotten that I hadn't realized they're empty. So unhide your columns and re-review them before you try and import. When you're ready to import, which is sort of the screen that I have now. I'm assuming I'm going to do this as like the load via spreadsheet option, which is here. I strongly recommend that you use this only validate option by selecting this checkbox. Um, to do that first before you try and run your job in production. The way that a lot of these import jobs run is that they will run and like they will complete all of the valid tasks, even if you have an error. And so that can mean that if you do have an error, you might have a partial upload of your spreadsheet, which then can result in you needing to identify what remains, run a second job to catch those remaining things and or have data cleanup. So catching those errors using the validation first will prevent that from happening. You also want to make sure that you're selecting the correct option for your import. So right now, this first one on the left is selected for import archivable objects. That is one that uses the bulk import AO spreadsheet. But if I want to use one of the digital object templates that Malaka had shown, you want to make sure that is selected. Just a little functionality reminder. Someone in the chat asked about linking top containers. So I can use the bulk import AO spreadsheet to create new containers. And but there's also this option called link top containers. And I just want to clarify that that has some limitations that you may or may not be aware of. So this allows you to create top containers and link them to existing archival objects that are already in a single resource record. You can also link existing top containers to archival objects, also in a single resource record. This option is not for adding top containers to the collection level, and it also an existing top container cannot be changed using this process. So for example, you can't add a container profile or a location to a top container using this functionality. And just to make it really explicit, all of the archival objects already need to be in the resource record for this link top containers functionality to be the right one for you. So if that is something that you want to use, I'm not going to demonstrate it in full, but there is some incredibly detailed documentation at the Help Center that I will put in the chat when we are at the break if it doesn't get put in there. And so the last section of this sort of tips and tricks grab bag is sort of on moral support and resources. Just, something that we wanted to emphasize is to keep with it. You are likely going to get errors the first few times that you import, and they're likely going to be human errors. But if you receive an error, just take a beat, read the log. We're going to show you that in the next section. And then try and decipher what it means. And it can be a real confidence builder to work through an error. If you get an error, try again in a half hour, maybe take a break, ask a colleague, look at it with fresh eyes. The first few times that you use any of these import spreadsheets, it will probably take longer than you would like. But once you get over the hump, once you finally understand what, the hierarchical relationship values, for example, it's going to become easier and quicker each time you do it. The spreadsheets are definitely overwhelming, but just as a reminder, it's nothing you don't already know. You can think of it as, it's just the ArchivesSpace record. It just looks a little bit different. Someone in the training group sort of made a comparison that like in ArchivesSpace, the records, I have a record open right now, kind of goes vertical. But in the spreadsheet, the fields and the subrecords are horizontal. If it's helpful to you, you might want to have a blank record template open and as like a reminder and a visual reference for what each field means. If you run into issues that you just can't figure out on your own, there are definitely resources for you. So one really great resource is the user list, which is a members only email list, and we can put that in the chat. You can also submit or comment on bug reports and feature requests for issues that you encounter. So if you uncover a bug, you can report that so then it gets addressed and corrected for everyone. If you find that you're limited in something that you really want to do that doesn't seem to be part of the functionality, you can also submit a feature request to see if that's something that can be added. Also, if you see existing tickets for something like that, you can comment upon them, especially if it's something that you're also keen for. Um, and then the last kind of tip regarding sort of like engagement is a recommendation to really read the release notes for new versions to learn about any changes that might be happening. I like to do this even for versions that I am not upgrading to. I feel like it helps me understand what's happening in the application. So that's just another thing that we would recommend. Um, we are about to move on to the next section, but um, I would really encourage everyone, if you have little tips or tricks of your own that kind of fall into this category, we would love to hear them. So in the chat, if you have something like this, just put like tip in all caps and then say what you do to avoid any errors that you come across. So we are going to move into the next section on diagnosing error messages. So in addition to these discrete suggestions and reminders, another really helpful skill when working with ArchivesSpace spreadsheets is having comfort and familiarity with reading the log from your background jobs. Logging generally documents the activities that occur in a system, and these events can include basic transactions that take place as well as errors that occur. So the better that you understand the logging messages, the better equipped you will be to correct errors that you encounter. So this section of the training will not be exhaustive, but I want to show you a handful of some very common errors that you are likely to encounter, show you what those look like in the log, and then go through the changes that you would need to make in your spreadsheet to correct them. I want to admit that there are absolutely times when I get an error message that I don't understand, and in those instances, if you can't decipher the meaning with some individual thinking, a little bit of web searching, the user list can be a really great resource. So I want to start with some common errors that we've already discussed in our training. So for all of these examples, I'm going to be working off of this test record that you see here for the Ghostbusters records. So here's the resource record. Here is the call number. And I'm going to be toggling a lot between ArchivesSpace and some spreadsheets. And just in full disclosure, I am not working on my normal computer, which has gone to another plane of existence. So I appreciate your patience in advance. So we've already mentioned that there are only a few required columns in these spreadsheets. So I want to show you what kind of error message you will receive when you attempt to run an import job without information in a required column. And we're going to do a few variations of that. And also, I just want to clarify, for most of these, I'm going to run, these are the bulk import AO spreadsheet, but hopefully, the messages will be really similar if you were doing a different kind of import. So if we look at my spreadsheet, as Miloche said, every row in my spreadsheet needs to have something in either the EAD ID or the resource URI field. And I know Miloche showed this, but I just want to remind everyone the EAD ID is in the Finding a Data section of your ArchivesSpace record. So in my spreadsheet, you can see, make it slightly bigger. that my first few rows, I have the correct EAD ID here. But if we look further, this is empty. So clearly, this is human error, just forgot to copy it down. And for these rows that there is no EAD ID, you can also see that the resource URI column, which is directly next to it, is also blank. So we are going to try to import this and see what happens. And for all of these, I'm going to run them with validate only option, but the error messages you see will be the same if you tried this in production mode. So I'm going to select my file. And as soon as my job starts, my log will also start and it tells me what is happening. So just going to refresh this. One tip that I like to do a lot is to do just a find for the word error to see if there's any errors. And I can see that I'm going to highlight this. Starting with that row, the first row that didn't have an EAD ID or a URI, I get the following message which says, error, this row is missing both both an EAD ID and a URI. So I think this is a pretty human readable error message telling me that my row needs either an EAD ID or a URI. So I'm gonna get out of here, and in my spreadsheet, I'm gonna pull this down, and I am going to save that. We'll go back to ArchivesSpace and try it again. And you can see here, hopefully, and I'll confirm that there are no error messages here. So that was a pretty simple correction to make. Oops. Okay. Sorry, there's many screens and windows to toggle. So I want to show you a variation, which is what would happen if you entered the wrong EAD ID for the collection. And this is something that can happen if you've used an existing spreadsheet to work off of, but maybe forgot to change the details. Maybe you didn't get rid of sample data. You've misspelled the EAD ID or used a different capitalization. So I'm gonna find my new pre-cooked spreadsheet. And again, we're working off of that same Ghostbusters record. And I'm just gonna highlight that column for the EAD ID. So instead of the correct EAD ID, I have a completely different one for some reason. So we're gonna see what happens if we do that. And again, errors for every row this time. And it says, I'm just going to highlight one of these, forms EAD ID Acto001 does not match rows EAD ID MSS01. So again, I think this one's relatively easy to understand. It's telling me that these two things need to match and that they currently don't match. So we know that all we need to do is edit it to the correct EAD ID. I'm not going to rerun it again because it is so similar to our previous one. Now I want to show you one more example of what might happen if you don't have information in a required field. So in our next spreadsheet, get that pulled up. Oops, sorry. All right, sorry, that was on the wrong side. Okay. So you can see that I'm using, like Malaka showed you earlier, these hierarchical relationship values and also the description level column to create hierarchy. So I've created a series and I've created a file under my series. I've created another series and then files under those series. If we move all the way down to rows 18 to 20 though, which I'm highlighting right now, you can see hopefully that I've forgotten to put anything in this description level field. Again, very common. You've just, probably forgotten to copy and paste that all the way down. So let's see what happens here. Okay. And again, for these rows that I've highlighted, we get another error message. I'm going to highlight here. It says error invalid archival record level. And then in quotes, there's nothing because it's blank. Must be one of class, collection, file, fonts, item, other level, record group, series, subfonts, subgroup, subseries, missing valid description level. So this is maybe a little bit wordy, but the kind of core of the message says missing valid description level. The level of description comes from a controlled value list that is non-configurable, meaning that you cannot add to it. So in addition to it being a requirement in the sense of like you need information there, it also needs to be one of a specific finite list of values. So for example, if I had typed items, plural, instead of item, I would still get a similar error. And then, let's see. Now I want to show you what happens when a conditionally required field is missing. Conditionally required means that a field is not required for use by the system generally, but becomes required as part of another subrecord or field. So for example, you do not need to include instances in this import spreadsheet, but if you do, you need to specify an instance type. So let me bring up our next spreadsheet. And sorry, just making this slightly bigger. So you can see that the instances are over in these like peachy columns over here. And you can see I've like gotten a nice little box and folder list here. However, in row 13, you can see that this container instance type is blank, whereas, the lines above and below it have a value for mixed materials. So if we try and import this, we can see for this, this row of our spreadsheet, error unable to create container instance, missing container instance type. So again, if we just fill that in, we will be good to go on that. Another reason that folks tend to run into errors is often issues with dates. So I'm going to show you a few different ones that you might encounter and how to fix them. Let me just close that spreadsheet. So as a reminder, dates are not necessarily required for these spreadsheets, but if you use them, they do need to follow these conditional requirements and other validation requirements. Let me get our next spreadsheet up. So in this example, sorry. Oop, wrong row. So in this example, we're going to see what happens when your begin date is later than your end date. This is again a data entry issue, but one that actually I think comes up a lot. So in this row that I have highlighted, you can see that the begin date, which is in column W, is 2976. So we can assume that the user meant to type in 1976 and just made a typo. But that is a higher number than what we have in our end date column. I'm going to try and run this import. Okay, and I'm just going to highlight our error message. It says error, invalid date definition. End must not be before begin for date type inclusive, label creation, begin 2976, and 2002, expression blank. This date will not be processed. So again, it's maybe a little bit wordy, but at the core, it's pretty straightforward where it says end must not be before begin. What will happen if I had tried to run this in production? It said date will not be processed. It will just not create a date subrecord for that component. But if I make a change to 1976 and run it again, you can see that there's no errors anymore. So that's all it was, is just a data entry issue. We'll close that out. And pull our next example up. So here in row 9, we have specified that our date type is a single date. But if you look immediately to the left, you can see that there's information in both the begin and end columns. So let's see what happens with that. There it is. Okay, sorry. Okay, so our error message reads error single date, and then it gives you the whole text of the date record has end date that will be ignored. So again, this is not going to cause our job to fail, but it is something that you might want to follow up on, because maybe what you meant was for the date to be a range from 1980 to 2010, and you just chose single incorrectly, and you meant for it to be an inclusive date. So this is another reason why it's really good to run these as validate only, instead of doing it in production, because that gives you a chance to correct this before it goes into effect. So we're going to do one more. And let me just get the next spreadsheet up. Okay. So let's say that when I'm using this spreadsheet, I also want to use some of these other parts to add like subrecords and other detail. So let's say for my series, I want to create extent subrecords. So row 6 is a series, and then row 12 is also a series. And then you can see these extent subrecords are in like the green. But in row 6, you'll make it even slightly bigger. You can see that I've spelled feet two different ways. Um, and for one of these, I made a typo. So if I try and upload this spreadsheet, actually, I am going to do this in production to show you what's going to happen. And it says that it was unable to validate my extent for the one that I misspelled. So let's look at it. Let's look at it in ArchivesSpace because remember I did this in production, so my changes actually went into effect. So here's my series one, and it has my archivable object, it has my dates, but you can see that even though I had extent information in my spreadsheet, it did not create an extent subrecord because of that error. However, when we go to my, oh, actually, sorry, that worked slightly differently than it did in when I was testing. Fascinating. Okay, well, what I was going to hopefully show you that one of these series was supposed to have an extent record, subrecord, and one was not. But I clearly did not account for one of these issues. So apologies for that imperfect demonstration. The point I was trying to convey, and I think still stands, is that, again, this validate only option is really helpful because if you receive an error or something is not quite right with your spreadsheet, if you run it in production, it's going to put into effect basically all of the changes that it can make and then leave your like error-ridden part behind. So in that case, like I have my series, I have my objects, I have my dates, I have my instances, but now I have to go back and add these extent subrecords that I wanted to include. So if I had run this in the validation mode, that's something I could have caught, corrected, edited in my spreadsheet, and then when I finally imported it for real, everything would be there as opposed to now I have to go back. So hopefully that message still stands. So again, this was not an exhaustive explanation of every kind of error message that you will receive, but I hope that just kind of walking through some of these really common ones, decoding their language, seeing what it looks like in the log, and then demonstrating how to correct your data in response to them is helpful in making you feel a little bit more confident that you can do the same thing. Sometimes just, seeing the words error or a red button if your job completely fails, can feel stressful and, you can start to feel a little wound up. But the reality is that if you use this functionality a lot, you are going to have errors. We're all human. So just, remain calm, read your error messages, and especially for these really common ones, you're likely going to be able to figure a lot of them out and figure out what went wrong. So with that all said, I will pass things back to Malaka to talk about how to add digital objects to archival objects.
Thanks, Rachel. Back to setting up all this stuff again. Share. Alrighty. Welcome back to ArchivesSpace. Digital objects can be imported and linked to existing archival objects in a resource record in 3 ways. You can create archival objects and associated digital objects at the same time and import them to an existing resource record using the bulk import AO CSV or bulk import AO XLSX templates. Method number 2 is you can create and link digital objects to existing archival objects in a resource record using the bulk import DOCSV or the bulk import DOXLSX template. And then method number three, which is only for people who have 4.0 or later of ArchivesSpace, you could create and link digital objects to existing archival objects in a resource record by downloading a partially completed digital object CSV from within a resource record that is pre-populated with some archival object data. So for the bulk import archival object method, let's go here. This probably looks a little familiar. We got the cassette tapes again for the resource record of the oral history records in there. Um, I left in the KitKat so you can see that later. And we have some boxes. Everything's in box one because I have no imagination. And the child types are case. I didn't, yeah. And then I just numbered them 1 through 14. This blue section, because I've hidden so much of this other stuff, that's why you can't see it. So that you could see the blue section, which is the digital objects section. Um, the digital object ID, I'm going to leave as blank. I don't care if the system assigns something. I don't have any use for this field. A lot of people do. So of course they will fill this out with whatever their ID is, but I'm happy to accept the system defaults. The digital object title, if I leave this blank, then it's going to be the same as the title for the archival object. So I'm going to leave mine blank because why do extra work? I do want it to publish. I have the URLs. URLs have to start with HTTP or HTTPS. Um, then we have use statements, which you could read about, and they still make no sense to me. I don't really do digital objects. I just load things. Um, in the manual and or there's a digital object tutorial uh, video training session that you could probably download and watch too, and I'll provide links to that after I'm finished with this segment. And we got caption titles, etc. So if I take this one and we go to our resource record for the oral history project, if I click on load via spreadsheet and I'm going to import archival objects, I click on select file and it's this one. Of course, first I'm going to validate it and then import from the spreadsheet. We'll see if it works. It looked like it was happy with everything. There's no errors. So I'll close this. And in theory, I could do it again, but I just don't. It sometimes breaks. I don't know why. So I'll do this whole thing again, only instead of clicking on only validate, I will just let it go through. Click on open, import from spreadsheet. And it's done. Refresh page. And I'm just going to click on one of these randomly so that we can get to the record. So if I open up Bancroft, you'll see that it has an audio and a digital. And I could go here down to instances, and I could actually see the digital object that it created. The problem with this spreadsheet is that it doesn't give you enough fields. So if you wanted to fill in all the other stuff that we know is available down here, you can't really use this particular spreadsheet, like the agents and subjects, etc., because the agents and subjects are for the archival objects and not for the digital objects. Now, because I told you I put in KitKat just for you, let's go to manage controlled value lists. And back to the, I think it was the instance type, wasn't it? And now we have KitKat has been added. Woohoo! Um, so there's that. We'll close. Now for the second method, the bulk import digital object method. Um, if you're using a version before 4.0, you're going to have to use this version. So you're going to go to the gear menu and bulk import templates. Or you're going to go to the GitHub repository for those people who have even older versions and download the appropriate spreadsheet. I'm going to download the bulk import object, the Excel one, because I am just not a fan of the CSV. Click on download. Ta-da! So let's open up that. Just like the archival object one, you have an EAD or a resource ID that you have to fill out. Um, and you now know where to get those, but they have an additional required field of either a ref ID or an archival object URI. So let's go to yet another resource record in ArchivesSpace. Browse resources, maybe. There. And this one's on page 2. Native Americans in Film Collection. We go to that one. So again, your EAD ID is right here. You could find the resource ID in my search results if you wanted that. But your ref ID is, let's go to an archival object. So this is the archival object reference ID, and it's right here. And so for in this case, it's A space ref 13 MAH. So that would be the reference ID. And if I wanted the URI instead, I would do a search, Control V, today. And because I changed my defaults, remember, the URI now displays here. So I would enter this into the bulk import spreadsheet where it says archival object URI. Well, nobody wants to have to go around and call up every container archival object and copy paste all that stuff. So there is a slightly easy way to get to it. You would go to the collection level record and you click on export, and then you would say download the container template. I believe that's what I want to do. Yes. All right. When you open the container template, you will see that it has the archival object ID and the reference ID. So in the bulk import spreadsheet where it says ref ID, I could copy paste this down. But one, I'm not going to have a digital object for these 6 things that are the series. So I would want to delete them first, or at least not include them in my cut paste thing. So I'll delete those. For me, if I have to do it this way, the easiest thing is just to copy paste this. But if you really want to use the archival ID, object ID, you can't just use this number. You have to have that resource thing. So what you want to do is use this formula, which I also have here. So you have to use a formula. It'll be equal sign so that you could drag it down. And then because it's text, it's in quotes. And then you do slash repositories. You need to know your repository number. And in our case, it's 2. And then slash archival objects with the underscore, and then slash end quote for the text. And then you're going to do an ampersand so that it's combining that information with the cell. And we're going to start at B5. So I have the thing copied, and this field's not going to be doing anything anyway, so I will copy and paste that information here. So you see it's got the B5. And so now I could just grab the handle and yank that down. Ta-da. And now I could copy that, Control C, into my bulk import template. But the thing you want to do is right click. Oh, come on. Enable editing first, obviously. But right click and do values so that you're not pasting the formula. Dun-dun-dun, and obviously in a single line. So that's how you would get your information that's required into the digital object fields. So then you would fill out the rest of the record per how to fill out a digital object, just like if you were creating one manually. Um, so that's that one. And then the third method, which came with version 4, does this archival object reference ID for you, which is so much easier than having to go through all this to do it. So let's get rid of all this stuff. So if we go to another record, Raymond gets, and we edit that one. All right. So we have this record, and we want to attach digital objects to these existing archival objects. We would go to export and then download digital object template. This downloads the CSV version of the bulk import DO spreadsheet with the resource information already filled in, and with the archival object information already filled in. In my opinion, it would be handy if it had the title, but I didn't make it. Um, so you would have this information already filled in. And you can delete the rows for the ones that you don't want to attach the digital objects to create, in this case, I'm actually using the digital object ID. We got a title field, publish, VRA core. And you can see that I could add dates. I could add another URL. One is the representative and one is the not representative version. Um, and then you could add notes, agents, etc. with this spreadsheet, corporate body. So it goes on for a while. Extents, container types. So there's much more information you could add with this spreadsheet and the bulk import object, the bulk digital object spreadsheet than you can with the archival object spreadsheet. So I have this all filled out. No, I don't want to save it. And we'll get rid of that. So now at the resource record, I click on load via spreadsheet. Um, Very important, and watch it not do it. Ah, it didn't. Sometimes when you click on this thing, the blue radio thing, the button stays blue here, but see, here it is. So there's a way you could click on this accidentally. If you're in a hurry where the blue thing stays here, but it's highlighted here, so you think you're importing the digital objects, but you're not. So you'll get an error message. But again, if you validate, at least you didn't make anything blow up. So now I actually have the blue in both areas. I could click on only validate. I could click select file. And we could do the gets and import and see what it says. Do, do, do. And it worked. Yay! So we could go back and do it for real. Load via spreadsheet. Click on that. See, it did it again. I'm always doing it. And gets open import. And it worked. And we could go here. And now you can see that there's three of them that have digital objects that are attached. And we could go and look at the digital objects that are attached. Doo, doo, doo. So we got two versions, this one and this one. And this one is the onload embed. This one is not representative. This one is representative. So that's for those people who know what all that means. One is the thumbnail so that you see the little picture, and one is the actual master copy. So that's how you would do this. But remember, I said, ooh, I hate CSVs. They don't have all the pretty colors and all the formulas. Well, there's nothing stopping you from getting this information and plopping it into the download of the Excel version of the bulk import DO spreadsheet. So there's your helpful tip on that. All right. Now I believe we're ready for a break.
Since we're ahead of time, although I think we're going to need to use some of this extra time for the bulk edit functionality, Malaka, there was a question much closer to the beginning about what exactly the accession import template did. So could we just go back to that and re-explain that?
Sure. Do, do, do. All right. If you go to the bulk import templates, okay, so a session creates a session records and records linked to a session records like agents, subjects, and events. And assessments create and link assessments to existing sessions, resources, archival objects, or digital objects. And they both sound similar. So So depending on which one you want, not a lot of people actually work with assessment, but there is a CSV for it. But accessions, you could create brand new accessions, and I think that's what they were asking, right?
Yeah, I think the question was like, one, which template do you use to create an accession record, and also like the objects, the other records that are linked to an accession record, like an agent, a subject, and kind of linking those, just
Yeah,
clarifying.
so that's the accession import record would have all that information. Ta-dam. You go all the way over, the sample data has, well, you got your user defined fields, you have catalog dates. I think the user defined is the end. Oh no, so then you could have your agents, etc. added at the same time. Um, you'll need to experiment with agents, by the way, in all your spreadsheets because yeah, you might already have that dude in there. And how it links up has changed over the years. So again, it'll depend on your version. It used to just be it had to match, the string had to match, and the type had to match. But now we have IDs involved, so it might go ahead and create it as a new record, but at least notify you that it thinks it's a duplicate. So please experiment in the sandbox before messing with that stuff.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we got confirmation in the chat that that was a helpful explanation. So thank you.
Cool.
Um, so we're going to take a break. We're going to take 15 minutes. Um, so we will return at 1:40 Eastern. Please do the math for whatever time zone you are in, and we will come back and continue the training. Thank you so much. So this next section is very exciting. One, because the functionality is incredibly powerful and it's an efficient way to make edits across a resource record within the staff interface. And reason number two is this is something that is a relatively new addition to the application. It has been available as part of the ArchivesSpace core code since version 4.0. The functionality began as a plugin developed by Hudson Malanglo for the new school, and due to its popularity, it was later merged into the core code. This functionality allows users to download a spreadsheet for a set of archival objects from a resource record, and then the spreadsheet can be edited outside of the application to apply multiple changes to those archival objects, after which it is imported back into ArchivesSpace via a background job, which puts those changes into effect. You can only edit one resource record at a time, but it's a great way to do data cleanup on inventories, to change things like titles, dates, and even notes. And once you start using it, you're going to really appreciate how much time it saves you. And because it's available in the staff interface, it can also empower individual users who may not have access to the API to think about and address data cleanup needs. Let me get my screen set up again. I do just want to remind folks, and I think we have some people in the audience who are on versions below 4.0. So if that is your situation, you will not be seeing this in your functionality. But I'll mention something at the very end if you're very keen to use it. So what we're going to do is we're going to navigate to the resource record that we want to update. So I'm going to be working in this record for the Rocky Chin papers. So I'm just going to open up a few parts of the inventory. So in series 1, you can see that there are a number of things that I would like to change. I have issues with capitalization. You can see that some titles are in lowercase, others are in uppercase, some are in sentence case, and what I would like is, well, consistency above all, but particularly title case. There's also issues with dates, so you can see the first few components have no dates at all. If I open up a few of these, there are some dates that have only information in the machine readable section, but maybe nothing in the date expression. And then we are going to have sort of the opposite case where, where there's something in the date expression, but nothing in the begin and end, which is, to be clear, not an error, but perhaps something I would like to change. If we go back to my inventory, you can see that there's some typos here that I would like to correct. And then maybe there's some, let's see. There's a lot of other things here I might want to change. In the next series, for these first few components, each component has a general note that says located off-site, and I would like to maybe get rid of those. And then later on, I'm going to show you what for this series, these oral history interviews, I want to add notes for individual components. So there's a lot of change. There are a lot of changes that I would like to make to this record. And if I were to do that manually, opening each component, editing the date record, editing the title, adding or deleting notes, that would be quite time consuming, especially for a larger inventory. Another common use case when you do is when you would maybe do like rehousing or like significant renumbering of a collection where you would need to change a lot of box and folder numbers. So for example, maybe you had initially processed a collection into a certain kind of box, and now those boxes are extremely heavy, and you want to split them up into smaller boxes, which is going to require you to update so many of those box and folder numbers. And again, that would be a lot of work to do manually. So the bulk edit functionality makes all of that so much easier for us. So in these last few sections of the training, I'm going to demonstrate some of the functionality. maybe show you some things that you might not have thought of to potentially do, and then also talk about troubleshooting issues you encounter. And yeah, just one more reminder, it's in version 4.1 or above. So back to my resource record. I want to go back to the top level, so the collection level. And I'm going to click in the menu bar, More, and then Generate Bulk Archival Object Spreadsheet. So this brings up a picker screen, and this is where you select objects, archival objects that you want to be included in your spreadsheet. Just because they're included in your spreadsheet, it doesn't mean that you have to change them. So you might want to select, just the components that you want to edit. You might want to go series by series, or you may elect to select the entire collection. It's really up to you and what you need to do, but it is worth being mindful that, the larger your spreadsheet, the longer your job will take to run, and also, what you have in your spreadsheet, there is the potential to introduce errors if you do something that you don't intend. So it's just a consideration to keep in mind. This picker screen expands so that it's easy to navigate records with hierarchy and lots of components. So for example, you can see that the only parts visible are the individual series. But if I select the series, it then expands and selects everything underneath. I can deselect it and basically deselect these components, which gives me the option to, perhaps just select specific components. So you can do that, and then you can kind of pick what you want. So for this first example, I am going to select everything from series 1. As you do that, up at the top, you are getting kind of a real-time count of the number of records that are going to be included in your spreadsheet. So if I scroll down past my tree, I have some options to adjust what's going to be included in my spreadsheet. You do not have to change this. You can keep the defaults, but it can be sort of a nice fail-safe if you want to intentionally exclude fields that you know for a fact that either you never use, you definitely don't want people to have the temptation to edit, or are just completely irrelevant to your use case. So for example, let's just say that like the component unique identifier field is really important at your institution for a workflow. And if someone accidentally changed anything there, it would be a huge problem. So you can eliminate that possibility by just deselecting it here. And the same is true with all these different options that you see here. So for example, let's say that there are no digital objects in my record, and there are not going to be, so I can just deselect that, and then my spreadsheet is smaller and I have less to deal with. So you could do similar things with notes. And then if I scroll down even further, you can see that there's like a faint gray line here that kind of divides these sections. This is where you can change the minimum number. This is where you can change the number of subrecords and notes that display in your spreadsheet. So this first one, called minimum subrecords, controls the minimum number of each of the subrecords to include in your spreadsheet. So that could be something like a date or an extent or an instance, for example. And then extra subrecords controls the number of subrecords to include in addition to the greatest number found in any of the selected subrecords. So basically, this allows you to create new subrecords for the archival object. So it could allow me to add additional extent statements or dates beyond what I already have in my inventory if that is something I want to do. And then minimum notes is controls the number of each type of note subrecord to be included in the spreadsheet. I will be honest, when I use this, I rarely change any of these. And because I tend to be a column hider, so do not feel like you need to, finesse this too much if you don't want to. But you can if you would like to. So once you've made your selections and adjusted any defaults, you will select Download Spreadsheet. Okay. All right, we're going to look at our spreadsheet and let me make it a little bit bigger. And again, I had just included series one. So I like this functionality a lot because I feel like the spreadsheet is pretty intuitive and I think it's structured in a way that's relatively easy to understand and work with. So there's two sheets. You can see these two tabs at the bottom. You have your updates sheet, which is where you're going to be working. And then this enums sheet, the second one, I'll just explain what that is. So enums is short for enumerations, and that includes the values and translations for information that's stored in controlled value lists. So if that's something, if you want to refer to that, you can. But for the most part, you're working in the updates sheet, and I am going to unprotect the sheet so that I can make changes. That's why there is that lock icon. And you can also see, well, maybe you can see something that would be probably in like somewhere in this like CDE range, had I not deselected it, is a column for the component unique identifier. That's where it would be. But since I deselected it from that options, that list of options, it's not in my spreadsheet. So it's kind of hard to show you. So now I can start making some changes. Make this even bigger still. So something I didn't point out when we were in ArchivesSpace, but something I do want to do is be a little bit more consistent with the level of description in my inventory. So you can see for the most part, aside from the series level, when I have kind of my list of box and folder numbers, for the most part, I'm using file. But these first few components, it's a little bit all over the place. We have a couple items and then this other level. So what I would like is for these to be all files. So I'm going to change that here. Okay. The other thing that I would like to do is put in some dates where they're missing. So you can see these first few rows, these first few components have nothing in the date range. Just for the sake of doing this pretty quickly, I'm just going to copy some of these dates in here. But if I were doing this for real in my work, I would be probably a little bit more careful. And then let's see for this one here where there's something in the date expression field, I would like to put something in the begin and end date. So I'm just going to do that here. Okay. And then I see that there's a typo here in this row. Oop, that's in this row that I'm highlighting. There's an O instead of an A for Asian movement, and so I'm going to make that change here. So I'm just going to make a quick change. So these are all some really simple, really quick changes, kind of individual. I am not going to run this job just yet for reasons that will become clear a little bit later when we talk about troubleshooting. But these are just really simple edits that you can make using this functionality that are huge time savers, especially if they are pervasive across your inventory or your record. And these are also, I think, updates that most folks are going to be able to do. They're not particularly technical or complex. They're filling in missing information or making small changes. So um, I realize how simple that looked when I did it just now, but they're also very common things that we really need to often do with our records. So those are the changes. So now that we've gotten our feet a little bit wet, I want to show you some other edits that you can make using this spreadsheet that are perhaps a little bit more advanced, or have a few kind of additional considerations to keep in mind. And again, this is not meant to be exhaustive in terms of like showing you every single part of the spreadsheet or every possible data cleanup example that you might encounter or want to do. I'm just trying to sort of give you some ideas and kind of show you some possibilities. So, um, one of the things I mentioned when we were first looking at the inventory in ArchivesSpace was this inconsistent capitalization. And this is something that I can do in this bulk edit functionality. So I could potentially, change this manually if I wanted to. I could retype it. But even though that's, I guess, like more efficient doing it in the spreadsheet than opening up every component in ArchivesSpace, like it's still a little bit inefficient. So what I am going to do is use an Excel formula. So because this is this is a spreadsheet, you can really leverage the possibilities of working in spreadsheets. So I'm going to use an Excel formula to do this a lot more efficiently. Um, However, something that I do need to do is temporarily create what I'm going to call like a scratch column for me to work in. So, this is something that if you do it, you should be very careful and also make sure that you delete it right away. But, so I'm going to create a new column. Could be either left or right, it doesn't matter. And just in the title field, I'm going to leave a note for myself that says delete, because I need to delete this before I finish. So Excel has a formula where you can change capitalization. You can change things to uppercase, to lowercase. I'm going to use a formula called proper, which puts things into title case. So I'm going to start my formula with an equal sign, which is how you sort of invoke a formula. And then I'm going to find the formula name. Then going to point it at the text I want it to perform its formula on. And then I'm going to close my formula with the parentheses and then execute it. And it's so faint, but I'm gonna make it bigger. But you can see in this like light gray that it has capitalized what was in this other column in the way that I wanted it to. And now I'm going to just drag it down. I'm just going to drag it down to like this row and show you how it's doing the same thing for all of these other rows in my spreadsheet. So that was, again, so much quicker than typing it myself. We are not done though, because if you see when I like put my cursor on one of these cells, if you go up to this like formula bar, which is where you would see basically like shows you what's the text in the cell, it doesn't say, for this one, for example, it doesn't say Asian American movement. What it says is proper D4. So I think Malaka had explained this earlier of like, this is a dynamic formula, and what you're seeing are the calculation instructions. So what I want to do is I want to copy and paste back my new like the results of my formula, but not the formula itself. So what I'm going to do is a special kind of paste, or sorry, a special kind of, first I'm going to copy, and then I'm going to do a special kind of paste called paste special values, which Malaka showed earlier. And so now you can see that now in my title column, not only is it capitalized the way I want it to be, but if we look back up here, it is the actual text. It's no longer my like formula instructions. So now that I've done that, I'm going to make sure I delete my temporary column. And so now we have cleaned up that capitalization issue. The other thing that I want to do, I had cleared up that one typo earlier because it was like discrete, but something that I see is I'll highlight them, is that someone has misspelled publications and misspelled it the same way every time. So I have it here, I have it in row 23. Um, I have it in row 42. I'm not going to show you every instance of it, but it is pervasive and it is consistently pervasive. So instead of manually making this change, I'm going to use find and replace to make that change multiple times for me. So I'm going to go to find, and I'm going to use the replace option. And I'm going to say for every time that you see this particular misspelling, I want to replace it with the correct spelling of publications. I feel very confident in doing this, so I'm just going to immediately go to replace all. But if you wanted to be a little bit more cautious, you could first find all of them, and then once you've confirmed that, do the replace function later. So I'm going to say replace all, and it's made 7 replacements. So again, so much quicker than doing that individually. I could do the same thing for, let's see, I think somewhere in here is an acronym. Yeah. So let's say, for example, that I have multiple instances of this particular organization name, and actually, that's not the one I was thinking of. It's this one. And that instead, what I want to do is replace it with an acronym. Sorry. So instead of the full name of the organization, I want to use the acronym. So I'm going to go back to my find and replace and make sure that you've cleared out anything you've done before. And I'm going to say, find this particular string and replace it with this acronym. And it's done it 4 times. So those are, again, pretty simple, but things that you also might come across. You can also do a little bit of data cleanup with this. So let me just make this column a little bigger. Yeah. So what I want to look at is these few rows, 16 to 19. In the title field, we have both a title and we have a date. So let's say, for example, I would really love if the date were not in the title field, but instead were in the date subrecord. And you can see there's no date information over here. So again, I could probably, I could just type this, but because we're using Excel, we do have some functionality here that can help us do this a lot more efficiently. So I'm going to do something similar to when I use the capitalization formula, but this time I need 2 new columns. and you will see why shortly. So I have my two kind of temporary columns. Just gonna remind myself that I need to delete them. The reason that this is, oh, actually, sorry, I like needed to pre-cook this data and I clearly forgot to do something here. Um, the reason that this is like a good candidate is because it's data to clean up, but it's also like very consistent in the fact that for each of these, I have my title first, I have a colon, a space, and then two dates separated by a hyphen, and they all kind of follow that pattern. So because it's a pattern, I can give instructions for Excel to make changes based on a pattern. So I'm going to use another formula. This one is called text split. There are other ways to do this kind of thing. You can use a feature called text to columns. You could also probably do it with like the length function if you wanted to, but this is just, personal preference. What I tend to find is easier. But that does not necessarily mean that that's how you should do things. So in my first temporary column, I'm going to start my formula with an equal sign. Oops, I'm gonna find my formula name. It's called text split. And then I'm going to point it at the cell with my data, and then a comma, and then in quotation marks, I'm going to tell the formula what character I want it to split my text based on. So for this, I want it to split what's before, split on that colon. So give me, you know, section 1 is going to be what's before the colon, and section 2 is going to be what's after the colon. And then I'm going to close my formula with a parentheses, and then I'm going to execute it. And you can see that that's why I needed two columns, is so that one would get the title and the other would get the date. And so I'm just gonna drag that down for these other rows that have the same thing. And you can see now I have my title and now I have my date. I'm gonna do the same thing that I did before, which again is like, instead of pasting back the formula, I want to paste back the results of the formula into my title field. So I'm going to copy it and then paste special values. And then I could do the same with the dates. I could have, because it was a range that was also like consistently actually, I should have done that first. Sorry, it went away. But I could have pasted that, or sorry, I could have split that even further to get begin and end dates. But just for the sake of moving the demonstration along, I'm going to leave it where it is. And you can see it's a little bit cleaner here. Just imagine that I moved those dates over too. So you can do kind of a combination of things. You can do really simple stuff. You can do things that are a little bit more advanced. You can use things like formulas to help you. You could also potentially work in OpenRefine if you would like to. I know that that's an application that people enjoy a lot for data cleanup. And in some ways it can be more attractive because I think it kind of like guides you a little bit more in terms of like how to clean your data, whereas in Excel you maybe like need to know what formulas or what kind of actions you want to take a little bit more. I would maybe just caution that if you do elect to like take this spreadsheet, put it into OpenRefine, is to be really careful about new columns that you create. I feel like OpenRefine kind of works a lot based on like creating new columns and doing your transformations in new columns. But it can be very easy to diverge quite far from the sort of original structure of the spreadsheet in Open Refine. So that's just maybe a kind of a word of caution if that's something you're considering doing. And I would also maybe mention that like a lot of what you can do in OpenRefine, you can do in Excel with these specific formulas. So um, just a plug for Excel that it's incredibly powerful. And the sort of variety of formulas that you can use are pretty incredible. I recently found out that there's like a formula for converting like integers into Roman numerals and the other way around, which I thought was really interesting. Anyway, once we are happy with our changes, we want to save our spreadsheet. So just to kind of do a little bit of a recap, things that we changed included we changed a lot of the levels of description for the components so that they were consistently titles or consistently files. We made our capitalization consistent. We changed some typos. One we changed just manually by retyping it. Others we did a find and replace on. We also did a little bit of added some dates where there weren't dates before, added things to different parts of dates that were missing, and then we also did a little bit of data cleanup by moving some dates out of titles. So that is kind of a summary of our changes. So we're going to go back to ArchivesSpace and put these into effect. So we are going to navigate to the background job section, and that is found in the gear icon, background jobs. I'm going to say create job, and we're going to select this bulk archival object updater. I'm going to select that here. I'm going to add my file. You don't have to rename it or anything. And then there's this checkbox option here called create missing top containers. We will come back to this in a minute when we talk about our use case for updating box and folder numbers. So we will come back to it. I'm just going to keep it simple and leave it unselected for the time being. And then we're going to say start job. And it runs like any other background job. And we're going to refresh it. I'm going to search for an error, and there were none, which is a huge relief. And then I'm just going to go back to my record here. So we can see, if you remember, oh, this did not get changed. I would follow up on that later. Most of our changes got put into effect. These components that had their level as item got changed. They're now files. My capitalization got changed. My typos were changed, both the one I did individually and the ones that I did a find and replace. I can't remember exactly where I had my missing dates, but I think this was perhaps one of them, and so now these have dates. So you can see, like, I made a bunch of different changes using a lot of different methods, and I was able to do those all in my spreadsheet and then import them back into ArchivesSpace where my changes were put into effect. So that's really, really helpful. So I'm going to show you a few other examples of things you might want to do. First, I want to get rid of that spreadsheet. So let's say that we want to add a lot of individual notes to individual archival objects. So we're going to move to this series 4, which is like an oral history series. And we have components for different interview subjects. They're just A through E. And so let's say, for example, that we've done a project where we've described them on an item level with like an access note, a biographical note, a scope note, or something. And so, like, let's say we did that in a spreadsheet, and it would be really time consuming to like cut and paste all of those things individually back into ArchivesSpace for each component. So in order to do that, I need to create a new spreadsheet, and I need to do that for two reasons. One is because my previous spreadsheet only included the components for number one. And then, as foreshadowing, there is a second reason that I need to do that that I will explain later in the troubleshooting section. So I'm going to go back to my collection level under more, and I'm going to create a new spreadsheet. And for this one, I'm just going to include series 4. I'm going to get rid of a few things down here just to kind of make my life easier, but I want to keep my notes. So I'm going to download a new spreadsheet. And again, it's you don't have to rename these. Uh, if you do not want to, you can leave them with their kind of download names. And I'm going to make this bigger so it's easier to work in and unprotect it. So in the interest of sort of time and ease, I'm going to kind of fill this with sort of some placeholder text because it's sort of difficult to like pre-cook a swap for this. Like, unfortunately, we can't do it like a cooking show. So I'm going to scroll past all of these extent date instance records. This is where those like minimum and extra subrecord options come into play if you found those really annoying, but I'm just going to move past them. So let's say, for example, we want to add conditions governing access notes. We want to add biographical notes and maybe scope notes for each subject. So I'm just going to put in some like placeholder text. So I'm going to kind of alternate and say like, I'm going to say that half of these are open. And then for the others, I'm going to say interview restricted until 2075. Okay, so that is like the text of what I want to put into my conditions governing access, like the free text part of the note. You can refer to like in in row 2, there's like a little bit more information on like what part of the record this is referring to, if you're confused. And then let's see. I don't really need a label, but for these interviews that are restricted, I'm going to put information into the begin and end restriction dates. So let's say, like, for example, what year is it? We're going to say that the restriction period began January 1st of this year, excuse me, and that it will end January 1st of 2075. So I'm going to copy that into the other one down here because they're the same thing. And then there's also like a part of that machine actionable restriction note that kind of asks you to state what kind of restriction. So we're just going to say that this is a donor imposed restriction. So I'm going to include that there. And so that will create our conditions governing access notes. We're going to scroll past, and then I am just going to put some placeholder text here because of time, but you can use your imagination. And then same thing here. This is it. And then this one, I am going to change the label so that I can specify that is a biographical note instead of like a historical note. Okay, so again, this is placeholder text. I'm doing this really quickly, but hopefully you get the idea of what's going on here. So I'm going to save my spreadsheet again, and then we're going to return to ArchivesSpace. And we'll run it the same way that we ran our other job. Gear icon, background jobs, create job, bulk archivable object updater, add file. And it's this most recent one up top, I remember. We're going to start our job. And so if we go to ArchivesSpace, hopefully you remember, but I'm just in one of the components for one of the subjects. It has created my notes. It's created my conditions governing access, my scope note, my biographical note. We had alternated. So this is one that had a restriction. It says it's restricted until 2075. So again, that was much quicker than doing that manually by cutting and pasting. It also reduces the possibility of introducing errors when you're doing that. So really handy, really helpful. So we just added a bunch of notes very quickly. On the subject of notes, could we delete a bunch of notes just as easily? The answer is yes, but with an asterisk. So I want to show you what I mean by that. So series 2, if we look at the first few components, there's a general note that says located off-site, and it does that for every component. It actually doesn't do it for every component because I did not add them all, but this is definitely a legacy practice that we had at my institution where for every like file in an inventory, if it was located offsite, it had that listed. And then, you know, it was a legacy practice from when the location information wasn't as easy to recall. But it's not something that we need anymore, and we definitely don't need it every object. So I'm going to create a new spreadsheet. Okay, just wanted to make sure I closed the other one. And I'm just going to pick all of series 2 because that's where I'm working. I'm just going to keep everything as is in the spreadsheet because I'm kind of moving through them so quickly anyway. Downloading my new spreadsheet. And making it bigger, unprotecting it. And I'm going to have to scroll pretty far over to get to the notes section. Nope, not that one. Okay, so here you can see these are those general notes that I want to get rid of. So what I'm going to do is just clear these cells. And then I'm going to save my spreadsheet again. And we will see what happens because whether or not you are able to sort of perform this function using this spreadsheet is dependent on your configuration. So my job failed. I knew it would fail. So what we get here is we get an error message that says deleting a note is disabled. Use app config, bulk archival object updater. apply deletes equal true to enable. So we are going to talk in the next section about what to do if this is functionality that you would like to employ. But the default setting is that this is not enabled. So if that's something you want to do, you need to kind of go in there and get that changed. But I'll show you kind of more what that looks like. But I just wanted to bring this up because it's kind of the natural counterpart is like, oh, I can probably delete a lot of notes really quickly. And it's like, you can, but you need to sort of enable it first. So another common use case where you might want to employ the bulk update functionality is to update a large number of container numbers. So for example, you've rehoused a collection or part of a collection, and now you need to update the box and folder numbers in your inventory. Again, this would be very time consuming to do manually with the ArchivesSpace application, and it's also like I think doing it manually also introduces the possibility of a lot of errors. So we're going to go back to our resource record. And there's sort of like two different scenarios for updating like container information, and we're going to walk through each of them. So the first one, which is more simple, is when you do not need to create any new containers. So by that I mean all of the containers that you will need, even for updating them, are already linked to this resource record. So just to sort of confirm what I mean by that, if I go to manage top containers for this collection, I can see that I have boxes 1 through 24, and then some other like shared boxes. So boxes 1 through 24 are already exist, and they're already linked to this collection. So I'm going to create a new spreadsheet for series 2. Let's just pretend that that's the only one we need to change right now. And I'm going to open this up. And we're going to make it much bigger. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to scroll all the way over to my instances where I have the current box and folder numbers. So we can see that there's stuff from box 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a few others. Again, just for the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to make this really simple and really obvious. But, if you were using this in the wild in your daily work, you would probably be being like more careful than what I'm doing now. So I'm just going to pretend that everything in this series, in this inventory, is now in box 5. And I am just going to do a straight run of the folder numbers. So like 1 through 18, 16. And then I also want to get rid of the barcodes because those barcodes referred to like boxes 1, 2, and whatever. I'm also going to fill that in. So this is primarily like I'm being so like obvious and simple for the purposes of this demonstration. So I'm going to save my spreadsheet again, and we'll run our job again. I don't need this create missing top containers activated just yet because I don't have any top containers that are missing that need to be created. I'm going to find my file again and start my job again. Okay. Oh, I think it maybe did want my barcode. Um, okay, sorry. This worked differently when I was testing it earlier. Top container not found attached within resource record, barcode 5. Oh, I think it wants me to add that barcode. So let me find that again. So this is the barcode for box 5. And we're going to paste that in there. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, so sorry about that. That was an oversight on my part. Um, if you are pointing it at a different top container, it clearly wants you to also include the barcode. So let's just go into ArchivesSpace again. And so again, now you can see that all my components are now in box 5 in this run of folders that I specified. So that's kind of the first option. However, when you do this kind of rehousing, oftentimes what happens is you end up needing to create new boxes. Like your collection maybe has grown because it's in smaller boxes. So you're probably going to need to create new containers. So let's work in series 3 for this next example and create a new spreadsheet. I'm going to do all of series 3. Let me get rid of that other one. Okay. So if we remember from the top containers screen, this collection already has boxes 1 through 24. So let's say, for example, this is we need to create a lot of new boxes. And so let's say this is now in like box 55. I'll keep the folder numbers as is for now. And so this is a container that is currently not in ArchivesSpace. It needs to be newly created. So we are going to show you what happens here. So I'm going to select this create missing top containers because I do want it to create top containers that I guess they're not really missing, but they're not yet in ArchivesSpace. So I want it to create these containers that don't currently exist. That's why I've selected that. And I'm going to start my job. So let's like go back here. Whether or not this works for you as it did for me will depend on the way your ArchivesSpace instance is set up. So this is actually quite similar to when I was when I was attempting to delete the notes using this functionality. It is something that is controlled by the configuration file. So I'll show you that in the next section. But the fact that I was able to do this is in part because I selected that create missing top containers option in the when I ran my job, but it also means that something in the configuration file had already been turned on for me, and I'll show you what that looks like. So we are going to finish this bulk updater section with a little bit more about troubleshooting and workarounds. So we saw that I was able to successfully update my container numbers, even though the container didn't already exist. If that is not yet turned on in your configuration file, there is a workaround. So what you can do is in ArchivesSpace, before you run your job, you can create a new component. So I'm just going to create a sibling here and say temp, delete, whatever you would like. And then I'm going to add a container or whatever to it. So I'm just going to say that. Let's say it's Box 101. And now it's in ArchivesSpace. So if that is kind of a workaround if you aren't able or have not yet been able to turn this on in your configuration. It's not too onerous when it's, one box or two boxes, but if it's a lot more, it could be a little bit more of a hassle. You could certainly, you know, use the upload. You could use the upload spreadsheet or use rapid data entry if that's easier for you. Um, but let's say you do want these adjusted in your configurations. So if you are locally hosted, you can do that yourself or talk to maybe whoever is sort of helping you with your instance. And if you're hosted, you can ask your service provider to do that for you. You just want to be really careful with sort of both of these sort of pieces of, I guess, like more enhanced functionality to make sure that people are like properly trained and that they don't inadvertently like delete data that you don't want them to delete or create lots of new top containers. That's almost certainly why these are not like the default settings to begin with. Um, I just want to show you like where that lives. So this is the ArchivesSpace source code. I'm just here in GitHub. And sorry, I can't really it's a little bit bigger. Um so it's in this part of the code and common config and config defaults. So this is it's a big file here. And it dictates a lot of the ways that ArchivesSpace functions. Um, so, I'm not going to scroll through the whole thing, but if I do just like a find for updater, um, you can see in line, oops, that's not what I meant to do. In line 853, it says that same error message when I tried to delete those notes. It says bulk archival object updater applied deletes equals false. So this is the default setting. If I want to be able to do this, I will change this to true. And then once that change is put into effect, I will have that functionality available to me. The same thing down here where it's create missing top containers equals false. That had clearly already been adjusted for the test instance I've been working with today, but might not be the way that yours is already set up. So again, if that's something that you want to be able to do, that's you would just want to change this to true. And so like, depending on how you're sort of structured at your institution, if you're hosted, it can be potentially really helpful to be able to like be really specific in your request to say like, hi, I want to be able to do these things. Like here are the places in the config file and I want these values changed to true. That can be a much more effective way to like, if you have like um, sort of colleagues who are helping you with your instance to be able to get those changes put into effect. Um, a few years ago, Valerie Adonisio of Atlas did a really cool webinar explaining different aspects of the config file and also shows like a handful of small adjustments you can make in it that can really improve your working experience in the system. It's a few years old at this point, but a lot of the core concepts hold true, and I'll put a link in the chat when I'm done talking to that video. So I want to demonstrate one more thing that's sort of troubleshooting related for this functionality. So you remember we added all this stuff for the oral history series, and half of these interviews have restrictions on them. But let's say, for example, that maybe there was like a miscommunication and we put the wrong date in. And so now I want to change that again. So, let's see, which was the one that I was working with? It's not that. Is it this? It is not that. Um, Remember when I said you don't need to title these? You don't, but it would have been helpful here. Okay. So this was the spreadsheet that I worked in and uploaded. And so I want to show you a common error that people sometimes run into when working with the bulk updater. So I'm in my original spreadsheet. I just want to clarify that. I did not create a new spreadsheet, even though I have made multiple changes to my resource record since I did this job. So let's say, for example, it's not 2075 that these interviews are restricted to, it's 2100, which is like a terrifying date to recognize as being like real. Can't believe it. Um, so I'm changing it in the free text field, and I'm also changing it in my end restriction date field, okay? So I'm gonna save this as, I'm just gonna change the title so I actually make sure. Access revised. So if I try and run my job like normal, something is going to happen. So my job failed, and this is the reason. It says versions are out of sync. Zero record is now one. What does that mean? So versions are out of sync, and it says it's related to the column, the lock version column. So let me download a new spreadsheet for this series because I think that's going to make it easier to explain. And I see we're getting close to our time, but we're very close to being done with this section. So again, I'm just doing my oral history series, and I'm getting a new spreadsheet up and running. So, okay. So let me adjust these. Okay. On the left is the first spreadsheet, the first version of the spreadsheet that I worked in, the one where I made the initial changes, where I added all those notes. And then it's also the spreadsheet where I tried to make additional changes. So I'm highlighting this column that they referred to in my error message called lock version. And I'm going to try and make this as big as possible. You can see that in this column, all the values are a 0. Okay? And then in the new spreadsheet that I just downloaded, the one after I received my error message, if I highlight this column, you can see that for all of these archival objects, the lock version column is 1. So I am not a developer. I'm not a software engineer. So I hope that I'm explaining this correctly, but the lock version is a value that prevents edits from, like multiple edits from overriding each other. So every time that a record is modified, its lock version increases by an increment. So you can see we have 0 and then we have 1. Um, if the lock version that you submit in your spreadsheet does not match the lock version that is currently stored in the database, your job will fail. And you want it to fail because you don't want these like edits to be like overlapping each other and overriding each other. So all of this is to say, like, if you are intending to use the bulk update functionality, you want to download your spreadsheet as close in time as possible to when you will actually run the job. And you also want to be mindful of if you or someone else is also potentially editing that same resource record that you are working in, because if someone or you make additional edits in the kind of intervening time, your job will fail. So I have covered just a handful of potential use cases, but for every field or sub-record available in this bulk update spreadsheet, there is a potential data cleanup option that you might want or need to pursue. So I hope that this is giving you a few ideas that will spark your imagination in that regard. Again, this is functionality that was introduced to the core code in version 4.0. So if you're working on an earlier version, this will not be part of your application. However, if it's something that you're keen to work with and you're not able to upgrade to a more recent version, you can check out the original plugin, which will have some slight differences, but is very similar in most regards. And I'll put that link in the chat to the plugin. So with that, we will move on to our Q&A.
Alrighty, we have one in the Q&A that says, when adding archival objects using the loading spreadsheets, are there any system or practical limitations on the number of rows that should be added? There probably is. Um, I don't go too far. Um, I can't remember I know we've done like 100. Um, it's just that if it messes up, that's a lot of records that you have to delete. So, and like I said, I know my staff, they prefer to do it by series. So I don't know. Rachel, have you encountered a limit?
I haven't encountered a discrete limit. I think there are, I completely agree with you. Like I found that my colleagues also tend to prefer going series by series. Um, I guess the other considerations are like, if you have other sort of performance issues that you've noticed in terms of like, that very large records take a long time to load for you. Like you'll probably see similar issues with like incredibly large spreadsheets. The other thing to keep in mind is the impact it will have on your indexer. So a really big job, a really big update can be a lot of like work for your indexer to then work through. So you might see some issues with incredibly large spreadsheets, but I don't have like a number. And if you're locally hosted, I think that can sometimes like there are different like deployment strategies in terms of like the resources that you devote to like your server and solar and etc. So if you're locally hosted and you're encountering that, one option is to do smaller spreadsheets or break them up, but another option might be to look at your deployment and see if you want to devote additional resources there.
All right. And then in the Q&A and in the chat, people want to put things in alphabetical order. And how would you do that with the bulk updater, and or is it possible?
Um, Folks can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it is not possible to do reordering using the bulk update spreadsheet. Um, However, this would be a great thing to see if there's like an existing feature request for that, and if there's not, to submit it, because I know that that's something a lot of people are interested in. But my understanding is that you cannot use it for that. But it's very understandable that you would want to.
All right. And then Ash asked if box 5 already existed, would it overwrite or would it add to that box? And I believe Kevin answered it, but I figured just in case everybody else hates reading all those chats. Kevin says, if box 5 exists and there are multiple references to it in an update spreadsheet, it should link all of those records to the existing top container.
And that's also probably why it's why it would be best practice, in addition to the system clearly wanting me to do that, to include a barcode, and that it will be more specific, that it kind of identifies it that way.
And then there's a question, mainly a clarification. If we want to be able to delete archival objects via the bulk edit spreadsheet, we'd need to edit our instance's config file.
That's correct.
Okay. And then, is there a way to bulk edit agent records? I know that one. No.
No, I don't believe so.
And we have two more in Q&A. Is there a way to use this tool globally for all of our collections? For example, we move to offsite storage and need to change all the locations. We also change dams and links are broken across all of our digital objects. Oh, I'm so sorry.
So the bulk update functionality that I demonstrated is resource record by resource record. So you cannot use it globally. Um, Depending on your like location change needs, like you can make changes across collections using like the um, manage top containers view, depending on what you're trying to do.
Kim says, following up on reordering, does that mean you also can't delete a record or a row?
I believe so. I would maybe test that out, but I believe so. And then I guess the counterpart is this next question about you cannot add new files. I'm assuming this is for like the bulk update spreadsheet. I do not believe you can like add new archival objects using that by like adding a row.
But you can use the bulk import AO
Correct.
to add.
Correct. So yeah, it's really about like making changes to what is already there without adding like new components.
Is there an efficient way to change the shelf locations of top containers in a collection using a spreadsheet function, or is that not possible? I would use it. I would use the bulk edit that's actually in ArchivesSpace. I can't remember what it's called now. I just go to that page. Manage top containers. There you go. That's what it's called.
We can show that quickly, if that would be helpful. So let's see. So on the gear icon, manage top containers, you know, often people are searching, collection by collection, but um, you can search like lo by locations, by container types. I'm not really sure what all is in this test instance, but for example, like, oh, okay, there's clearly nothing here. I know there's a bunch of like shared boxes. So this isn't particularly helpful, but like, um, let me try and find things that are like across multiple collections. Um, okay. Imagine, sorry, this is test data. So it's a little bit unpredictable in that regard, but like, you could bring up a lot of different, um, let's see. Okay, so just imagine that this is like maybe more than 6 records and it's beyond one collection. You could do some bulk operations to change their locations. It's maybe not quite as like um, efficient as you would like, but it is possible to like, to change lots of locations, put them in different places. Um, it's maybe a little bit easier if it's like all the same, but yeah, this is how I tend to change locations, but I'm not sure if there's like a more efficient way to do like very significant changes that's within the staff interface. That would actually be a really great thing to post on the listserv to see if anyone's done anything like that. People are uh, incredibly creative and smart and come up with all sorts of things, all sorts of like solutions. On that subject, I'm going to put a link to the ArchivesSpace, the awesome ArchivesSpace, which is a list of lots of um, like scripts people have created and other resources that are created by the community to like do all sorts of things. So that's another good place to look if you're like wondering if someone has like come up with an idea to do something in particular. That's a good place to look.
Yeah, and a lot of times the first answer from people is always going to be, "Oh, you could just use the API." And you always got to go, "Ugh, I don't want to do the API." So yeah, be aware that that'll be at least one of the answers to any of your questions that you put on a listserv. Alrighty. There any other questions? We have 2 whole minutes left. Don't forget to fill in the post workshop survey thing. We find it useful. It's the middle of the year, so we only have a few more to go, and then we have to figure out what we want to do next year. So this would be a good opportunity to fill that out and put in your comments about what you want to see next year. All righty. Hearing no more questions, we'll let you go. You get 1 whole minute back. Woohoo! Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.